Amber mentioned the PCO position. The PCO position, what that stands for is Precinct Committee Officer. And it is technically an elected position. It is the lowest level, the grassroots level elected position in the Democratic or the Republican Party. But we're assuming probably people who are watching this are not over there. And if you have a mind, as I and many of my comrades have done here, to focus on, and I know a number of people out there watching this are not necessarily supportive of this, but this is sort of part of an inside-outside strategy, which is really what is going to need to happen for us to be successful with a democratic socialist revolution in this country. But the PCO position is a critical position, and I'll tell you why. Every legislative district is divided into roughly 160 precincts. It's a geographical area. It's somewhere around 300 houses. And the PCO, Precinct Committee Officer, is technically in charge of canvassing their neighborhood for either the Democrat or the Republican Party, in order to let them know about upcoming ballot initiatives, upcoming elections, levies, and political candidates. That would sort of be the job of the PCO. You're supposed to canvass your precinct. But there's another part of the PCO position that is, in my opinion, even more important, and that is that the elected PCOs get to elect their local party organization leadership. So if you are an elected PCO, I'll just give you my own personal example. I live in the 44th Legislative District. Marysville 56th is my precinct. And I was elected to that position. I filed with the county, with Snohomish County. I filed in May of 2018. I didn't have a challenger, and I was automatically elected to that position. There's really no campaigning for the PCO position unless there are multiple people running in. For the most part, there aren't. I now have voting power for leadership in both the 44th Legislative District and Snohomish County, which means I cast a vote for who the chair of the legislative district is, who the vice chair, who the treasurer, who the state committee members are. And if you don't understand the Democratic Party structure in Washington State, the Democratic Party is essentially guided by the state committee. Now there's the chair and the executive board, some of whom are state committee members. But then there's every legislative district and every county gets to elect two different gendered people to represent them at the state committee level. So I was elected to represent Snohomish County back in 2016, and then in 2018 I was elected to represent the 44th Legislative District. So I actually sit on the Washington State Democrats Central Committee, and I've done a lot of work there, guiding the platform, introducing resolutions. I'll give you an example of the work that I did. I introduced a resolution at the April meeting in Pasco for candidates to reject corporate PAC funding from the healthcare industry, from the pharmaceutical industry, and from the health insurance industry. That resolution passed. It is now on the books that as a body, the Democratic Party rejects this funding. Now, we can't mandate what candidates do, but we can certainly say, these are our morals, these are our values, and we can seek candidates who represent those values. So that's what the platform does. Another thing that I did was, if you're aware of the DCCC, the recent policy towards them blacklisting vendors who work with candidates who are primarying sitting Democratic incumbents. The DCCC says, well, if any vendor helps somebody who's primarying one of our sitting incumbents, we're going to blacklist that vendor. We're going to make sure they don't get any work anywhere. So I wrote, and it passed, a resolution to reject that in Washington State. That we here as the Washington State Democrats, we reject that policy from the DCCC. We're not going to blacklist anybody. So that was something that, so there is power in this position if you get yourself elected. But I only got elected to that state committee position from the 44th Legislative District because I beat my brains out getting people to file for the PCO position. Like I said, every legislative district has about 160 precincts. Most of those precincts go unfilled every year. In 2016, the 44th Legislative District had 35 out of 160 PCOs, 35. Because of the inspiration that Bernie Sanders' campaign brought, and my friends in the 44th Legislative District who said, we have figured this out, we know how to commandeer, I'm going to use very aggressive terms here, to commandeer the Democratic Party and make it work for us instead of the corporations that it takes money from, okay? We went out and we filed for PCO in droves. So we tripled our PCO membership. We ended up with about 89 PCOs, where prior to that we'd only had 35. That was enough to get me elected to the state committee. It was enough to get progressive leadership elected. Of the 7 executive board positions in the 44th Legislative District, 6 of them went to Bernie Sanders progressives, because we beat our brains out finding people who were willing to file for this PCO position and then show up to the meetings and cast their votes for the candidates who were, for the right candidates, for the progressive candidates, who would essentially run the organization. On top of that, it's tiered, right? So you have your legislative district and you have your county state committee. They all go and they meet 3 times a year across the state, but those people also elect the state party leadership, okay? So if we want to maintain party leadership that is progressive, if we want the Democratic Party to work for the people instead of, like Rick Larson does, work for Boeing, okay? Instead of working for the banking industry, instead of working for the healthcare and pharmaceutical industry, if we want this party, this Democratic Party, to work for the people that it claims to represent, I am telling you right now, in May, 3rd week of May, is filing period for any candidate office in 2020. You have got to get out there and you've got to go to your county website and you've got to file for the PCO position. If you don't have a challenger, you're an automatic PCO. And you go to your county reorganization meeting and you go to your legislative district reorganization meeting, both of which will be held in December of 2020 or January of 2021, okay? And you get to elect your local party leadership and you get to elect progressive leaders. You cannot elect progressives unless progressives are filing for PCO. And I know a lot of people out there, if I said everybody out there watching right now, raise your hand if you want to take over the Democratic Party, a lot of you guys would go, I'm not really interested in any involvement with the Democratic Party whatsoever. I understand that, I get that, and I'm with you, okay? But inside-outside strategy means we've got to take over the Democratic Party also. And the leaders of the party, they hate me talking like this, right? But it's really what needs to happen. So I want you to remember 3rd week in May of 2020. Because what's going to be important is when Bernie is elected in November of 2020, he is going to need every state party behind him to get the agenda, to get the Democratic Socialist agenda enacted, to get Medicare for All enacted, to get free college at public colleges enacted. All of those policies are going to require the weight of the state parties behind him, because the state parties, if they're progressive state parties, they are going to put pressure on their candidates, right? Right now, I said earlier that we have only got a single progressive representative in Washington, D.C., and that's Pramila Jayapal. Now, we're either going to flip those people out of here, or we are going to put pressure on the people who are existing to support Medicare for All. We're going to let them know we've got a progressive state party here. There's no doubt about it, and we will find somebody to replace you unless you are going to get behind the policies that we support that are embodied in our progressive platform and our progressive resolutions. Okay, so I wanted to be that to be a closing message here. Okay, if there's any action item besides knocking on doors and making sure people get Bernie's message leading up to the election, it is you have got to get involved with your local Democratic Party. You have got to file for PCO, and we can take over this party. There are counties in this state who have no PCOs at all, right? They don't even have representatives on the state committee. If you live in Adams County, if you live in Asokan County, if you live in Garfield County, rural eastern Washington counties, Those PCO positions, they are waiting for you to file and say, here I am, and run that local party organization and send somebody to the state who is a progressive and make sure that we get progressive leadership running the state. Because I'll tell you again, people have this perception that Washington State is a progressive state. It is not. The reason it's not is not because of you guys, because we're all progressives out here. The reason is we don't have representation that's progressive. So we have got to get in there to make sure that we have that progressive representation.